Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Discovery watching the blue and green planet below spin slowly in the darkness of space. The research vessel had been orbiting Kepler 442b for 3 weeks, now studying the strange mineral deposits that could change everything for human colonies. Jake loved these quiet moments before his crew woke up for the next shift, when he could think about how far humanity had come in just 200 years. The peaceful moment ended when Lieutenant Danny Walsh burst through the bridge doors with sweat on his face and panic in his eyes. He carried a data pad that was flashing red warning lights, and Jake knew immediately that something very bad had happened. Danny had been monitoring long-range communications all night, and his hands were shaking as he handed over the device. Jake took the pad and read the message that had just arrived through Quantum Relay from Earth. The transmission was marked with the highest priority codes and came directly from Admiral Karen Phillips at Human Defense Command. As Jake read the first few lines, his stomach dropped, and he felt cold despite the warm air on the bridge. This was not just bad news, but the kind of message that could end everything humans had built among the stars. The message contained a recording that had been sent to every human world and station in known space, just 6 hours ago. The sender was Ambassador Zethkri of the Vorthan Empire speaking on behalf of something called the Galactic Coalition Council. Jake had heard rumors about alien civilizations beyond human space, but this was the first official contact, and it was not going well. He activated the bridge speakers and played the message for Danny to hear. The alien voice was cold and mechanical, speaking perfect English with no emotion at all. Ambassador Zethkri explained that 12 different alien species had formed a coalition to deal with what they called the human problem. They had been watching human expansion for 50 years and decided that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to continue spreading across the galaxy. The ultimatum was simple and terrifying. All human colonies and outposts beyond the Sol system had 30 standard days to evacuate completely. Every human settlement from the mining stations around Proxima Centauri to the farming worlds near the galactic rim had to be abandoned. Any humans found outside Earth's solar system after 30 days would be destroyed along with their ships and habitats. Jake paused the message and looked at Danny, who was staring at the floor with his mouth open. Neither man could believe what they were hearing, but the transmission codes were authentic, and the quantum signature matched coalition technology that was far beyond anything humans possessed. This was real, and it meant that humanity's greatest fear had finally come true. The recording continued with Ambassador Zethkri listing the reasons for this decision. He claimed that humans showed aggressive tendencies and expanded too quickly, without regard for other species. The coalition had decided that humanity posed a threat to galactic peace and stability. What made it worse was that the ambassador spoke like he was discussing weather rather than the forced exile of billions of human beings. Jake restarted the message from the beginning and called Dr. Lisa Carter to the bridge. She was the ship's expert on alien biology and had spent years studying the few artifacts that traders had brought back from beyond human space. If anyone could understand what they were really dealing with, it would be Lisa. When Lisa arrived, 10 minutes later, Jake played the message again and watched her face change from curiosity to horror to anger. She was quiet for a long time after it ended, then asked to hear it once more. This time she took notes on her personal pad and asked Jake to slow down certain sections where the ambassador talked about human expansion patterns. After the third playback, Lisa sat down heavily in the navigation chair and shook her head. She told Jake that something about the message did not make sense. The reasons given by the coalition were too simple, and the timeline was too specific. In her opinion, aliens who had been watching humans for 50 years would know that forced evacuation would never work and would only make humans more determined to stay. Jake asked what she thought the real reason might be, and Lisa pulled up star charts on the main display. She showed him how human colonies had spread across nearly 200 star systems in patterns that seemed random, but actually followed very specific routes. Every human settlement was placed in locations that other species had tried and failed to colonize because of extreme conditions. Humans were living and thriving on worlds with toxic atmospheres, radiation levels that would kill most life forms, and temperature ranges that made survival nearly impossible. What the Coalition really feared was not human aggression, but human adaptability. They were afraid of a species that could survive anywhere and refused to give up no matter how bad things got. Jake stared at the star charts for several minutes, thinking about every human colony he had visited in his 20-year career. Lisa was right about the pattern, and it explained why the Coalition wanted humans gone so badly. They were not just afraid of human expansion, but of what humans represented to the carefully controlled order they had built. He made his decision quickly and ordered Danny to open a channel to Earth and every human colony in range. Jake Morrison was about to send a message that would change everything, and he knew there would be no going back once he pressed the transmission button. President Elena Rodriguez sat in the Emergency Command Center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, surrounded by screens showing every human settlement across 200 star systems. The quantum communication array had been running non-stop for 6 hours as colony governors and military commanders reported in from across human space. What she was hearing should have filled her with despair, but instead, Elena felt something she had not expected. She felt pride in her species like never before. General Marcus Webb stood at the tactical display, pointing to fleet positions and troop numbers that made the human situation look hopeless. The Coalition had assembled over 10,000 warships from 12 different alien species and was moving them into position around major human worlds. The technology gap was enormous, with Coalition ships being 3 times larger and 10 times more powerful than anything in the human fleet. But the reports coming in from the colonies told a very different story than the one the aliens expected. Governor Steve Harrison from New Texas had been the first to respond to the evacuation order, and his message was simple. His people would not be leaving, and they were ready to fight for their home, no matter what the cost might be. Since then, every single human settlement had sent similar messages. Dr. Sam Taylor walked into the command center carrying a thick folder of research papers and looking like he had not slept in days. Elena knew him as Earth's leading expert on human evolution and psychology, and she had called him in to help understand what they were really facing. Sam had spent his career studying why humans behaved differently from other intelligent species, and his work might be the key to survival. Sam spread his papers across the conference table and began explaining his theory about human psychological development. He told Elena that most intelligent species evolved with strong submission reflexes that helped them survive by avoiding hopeless conflicts. When faced with overwhelming force, these species would surrender to preserve some chance of survival for future generations. Humans were different in ways that other species found disturbing and incomprehensible. Instead of becoming more cautious when cornered, humans actually became more dangerous and more willing to take extreme risks. This was not rational behavior by galactic standards, but it had helped humans survive and spread across harsh environments that other species avoided. Elena asked Sam what this meant for their current situation, and his answer was both encouraging and terrifying. He believed that the Coalition had made a fundamental error in their understanding of human nature. They expected the evacuation ultimatum to cause panic and mass surrenders, but instead, it was triggering something much more dangerous from their perspective. Every human colony was now preparing for what Sam called a total resistance response. Instead of trying to evacuate or negotiate the settlements, were implementing emergency protocols that had been quietly developed over decades. These protocols assumed that humans would eventually face an extinction-level threat and planned accordingly. General Webb interrupted to share intelligence reports that confirmed Sam's theory. Across human space, the colonies were disappearing, underground and destroying anything that might be useful to occupying forces. The farming worlds were poisoning their crops, the mining stations were collapsing their tunnels, and the manufacturing centers were sabotaging their equipment. More disturbing to the coalition would be the speed and coordination of these efforts. Within hours of receiving the ultimatum, human settlements that were light years apart had begun implementing identical strategies without any central coordination. It was as if the entire species had been waiting for this moment and knew exactly what to do. Elena watched the tactical displays update as more reports came in from distant colonies. The pattern was clear, and it showed something that made her smile despite the desperate situation. Humanity was not preparing to fight a conventional war because they knew they could not win one. Instead, they were preparing to become ungovernable and impossible to control. Lieutenant Colonel Beth Morgan entered the command center with an update from the outer colonies that changed everything. She reported that several human settlements had detected coalition scout ships conducting detailed scans of human infrastructure and population centers. The aliens were not just planning military action, but seemed to be studying human behavior patterns and psychological responses. This news confirmed Elena's growing suspicion that the coalition knew more about humans than they had admitted in their ultimatum. The forced evacuation was not really about human aggression or expansion, but about something that frightened the aliens much more deeply. They were afraid of what humans represented to their carefully controlled galactic order. Dr. Sam Taylor looked up from his research papers and voiced what everyone in the room was beginning to understand. The coalition was not trying to stop human expansion, but to prevent other species from learning that alternatives to submission existed. Humans were living proof that intelligent species could refuse to accept limits and could thrive in conditions that seemed impossible. Elena made her decision quickly because she knew that delay would only help the enemy. She ordered General Webb to send activation codes for protocol endurance to every human commander in space. This was the emergency plan that no one had wanted to use, but that every colony had prepared for since the first human settlements were established. Protocol endurance was based on a simple principle that other species would find incomprehensible. Instead of trying to preserve human civilization by surrendering, humans would preserve it by making surrender impossible. Every colony would become a fortress, every citizen would become a soldier, and every defeat would become the foundation for the next battle. Elena then recorded a message that would be broadcast to every human settlement in known space. She kept it simple, because the situation did not require complex explanations or emotional appeals. Humans already knew what they needed to do, and they just needed official permission to do it. Her message contained only 3 sentences that would become legendary in human history. She told her people that the aliens wanted to see what made humans dangerous, and that humanity would show them what made humans unstoppable. The final sentence was the one that would be remembered forever. Elena Rodriguez looked directly into the camera and said that humans do not surrender and they do not retreat, but they do remember who tried to make them. Admiral Kethvar of the Zenthari Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human colony of New Montana grow larger on the main screen. His fleet of 200 warships had traveled for weeks to reach this farming settlement that, intelligence reports said, contained 50,000 humans and no military defenses. This should be simple work that would send a clear message to other human colonies about the price of defying the coalition. The Zenthari had been chosen to lead this operation because they were known throughout the galaxy as efficient conquerors, who could occupy planets quickly and with minimal damage to useful infrastructure. Admiral Kethvar had personally overseen the successful submission of 47 different species, and he expected the humans to follow the same pattern as all the others. His tactical officer reported that orbital scans showed the colony's main settlement was completely empty, with no signs of life in any of the residential or administrative buildings. The farming equipment was abandoned in the fields, and the landing pads contained no ships or vehicles of any kind. It appeared that the humans had simply vanished, which meant they were probably hiding in the surrounding mountains, waiting to surrender. Admiral Kethavar ordered his ground forces to land and secure the settlement while his ships maintained orbital bombardment positions. The operation should take no more than a few hours to locate the human leadership and arrange their surrender. Once the colony was secured, his engineers would begin converting the farming infrastructure to produce food for coalition member species. The first sign that something was wrong came when the ground forces reported that all the crops had been poisoned with some kind of chemical compound that made them inedible. Every grain storage facility had been destroyed, and the water treatment. Plants had been sabotaged beyond repair. The humans had not just abandoned their colony, but had made it completely useless to anyone else. Major Vexthon led the ground assault team into the empty town looking for any humans who might still be hiding in basements or underground shelters. What he found instead were buildings that had been systematically booby-trapped with explosive devices connected to motion sensors. His first squad lost 3 soldiers when they entered what appeared to be an abandoned school building that detonated as soon as they stepped inside. The Zenthari soldiers were excellent fighters against conventional enemies, but they had never faced an opponent that turned everything into a weapon. Office buildings collapsed when weight sensors were triggered, and bridges exploded when vehicles tried to cross them. Even furniture had been rigged with small charges that could kill or injure anyone who tried to use the abandoned facilities. Admiral Kethavar watched the casualty reports climb higher and ordered his forces to withdraw from the settlement until engineers could sweep for more traps. This was not how conquests were supposed to work, and he was beginning to understand why the coalition was concerned about human behavior patterns. No rational species would destroy their own homes rather than allow others to use them. The real shock came when his orbital sensors detected massive underground construction that had not shown up on previous scans. The humans had somehow carved out an extensive tunnel network beneath the mountains that connected to natural cave systems extending for hundreds of kilometers in all directions. The scale of the excavation was impossible given the time available, but the evidence was undeniable. Major Vexathon reported that his reconnaissance teams were taking constant fire from hidden positions that seemed to move through the tunnel network faster than his soldiers could track. The humans were using the underground passages to attack from unexpected directions, then disappear before the Zenthari could respond. Even worse was that every attack seemed designed to capture Zenthari equipment rather than simply kill soldiers. Within 6 hours of landing, the Zenthari had lost more troops to human guerrilla tactics than they normally lost in entire planetary conquest campaigns. The humans were not fighting like desperate civilians trying to delay the inevitable, but like experienced soldiers who had been planning this exact scenario for years. Their knowledge of the terrain and their preparation levels suggested that they had been expecting this attack. Admiral Kethavar received a priority message from Mayor John Parker, who claimed to speak for the new Montana colonial government. The message was transmitted from somewhere in the tunnel network and contained an offer that no conquered species had ever made before. The humans would agree to negotiate surrender terms, but only if the Zenthari were willing to meet them underground on human territory. The absurdity of the proposal made Admiral Kethavar angry because it showed how completely the humans misunderstood their situation. He was commanding a fleet capable of destroying their entire planet, and they were trying to dictate terms like they had some kind of leverage. He decided to teach them a lesson about reality by demonstrating the power difference between coalition technology and human desperation. His ships began a systematic orbital bombardment of the mountain areas where the humans were hiding, and the weapons fire was powerful enough to collapse entire cliff faces and seal tunnel entrances. The bombardment continued for 2 hours and should have been sufficient to destroy any underground facilities and force the survivors to surrender unconditionally. When the bombardment ended, Admiral Kethavar demanded that the humans emerge and surrender immediately or face complete annihilation. The response came from Mayor John Parker again, but this time he was joined by engineer Kate Williams, who provided technical details that made the Zenthari admiral very uncomfortable. The humans explained that their tunnel network had been designed to survive orbital bombardment, and that the recent attack had actually helped them by providing additional rubble to camouflage new entrances. They thanked the Zenthari for the free construction assistance and mentioned that they had captured enough Coalition equipment during the fighting to keep their resistance supplied for several months. But the message that truly disturbed Admiral Kethavar was the final part where the humans revealed how much they knew about Zenthari psychology and Coalition military doctrine. Mayor John Parker calmly explained that the humans understood they could not win a conventional military victory, but that they did not need to win anything except time and attention. Every day that the Zenthari fleet remained in orbit around New Montana was a day that it could not be used to threaten other human colonies. Every soldier killed or wounded fighting in the tunnels was one less soldier available for other operations. The humans were turning their own conquest into a resource drain that would weaken the Coalition's ability to threaten other settlements. Admiral Kethavar realized that he was facing something completely outside his experience and training. The humans were not trying to defeat his forces, but to make victory so expensive that the Coalition would eventually decide that human space was not worth the cost of conquering it. 6 months had passed since the Coalition began their conquest of human space, and Admiral Kethavar stood in the war room of his flagship staring at casualty reports that made no sense according to everything he understood about military operations. His forces controlled the major infrastructure of 37 human worlds, but the humans themselves remained as elusive and dangerous as they had been on the first day of fighting. The numbers were becoming impossible to ignore or explain to the Coalition High Command. In 6 months of total warfare against a technologically inferior enemy, the Coalition had lost over 400,000 troops while killing fewer than 50,000 humans. Even worse was that human resistance was actually increasing rather than decreasing as more settlements developed new tactics and shared information through hidden communication networks. Dr. Amy Foster sat across from Admiral Kethavar in restraints that seemed unnecessary given her small size and calm demeanor. She had been captured 3 weeks ago when Coalition forces overran the research station on Kepler 442b, and she was the highest-ranking human prisoner taken alive so far. The Admiral hoped that interrogating her might provide insight into human psychology that could help end this nightmare. Dr. Foster was a psychologist who had been studying human behavior in extreme environments, and she seemed almost amused by the questions that the Zenthari intelligence officers asked her. When Admiral Kethavar demanded to know where the human military leadership was hiding, she laughed and explained that there was no central command because there did not need to be one. She told the Admiral that he was making the same mistake that every enemy of humanity had made throughout their history. He was looking for human armies and human generals and human battle plans when what he was actually fighting was something much more fundamental and dangerous. The Coalition was not at war with human military forces, but with human nature itself. Admiral Kethavar asked what she meant by that statement, and Dr. Foster began explaining concepts that challenged everything the Zenthari understood about intelligent behavior. She described how human children were taught from birth that giving up was worse than dying and that surrendering to bullies only encouraged more bullying. These lessons created adults who would rather fight hopeless battles than accept domination. The conversation was interrupted when Commander Billy Martinez led a desperate attack against the Coalition flagship, using nothing but modified mining, equipment, and a crew of volunteers who knew they would not survive the mission. His team managed to penetrate the massive ship's defenses and reach the main communication array before being killed by security forces. But Commander Martinez had accomplished his real objective, which was not to damage the ship, but to broadcast a message throughout the entire Coalition fleet. The transmission contained detailed casualty statistics and tactical analysis that painted a very different picture of the war than what Coalition commanders were reporting to their home governments. The data showed that humanity had turned the galaxy's most powerful military alliance into an occupying force that was slowly bleeding to death against an enemy that simply refused to stop fighting. Every human world required a permanent garrison to prevent uprisings, and every garrison was under constant attack from insurgents who seemed to materialize from the civilian population itself. Admiral Kethvar watched the message spread through his fleet and saw something in his officers' eyes that he had never seen before during his long military career. His soldiers were beginning to question whether this war could actually be won and whether the cost was worth paying. The humans had managed to do something that no enemy had ever accomplished before by making the Zenthari doubt their own superiority. Dr. Foster observed the Admiral's reaction to the broadcast and offered to explain why the Coalition strategy was doomed to failure regardless of their technological advantages or numerical superiority. She asked him to consider what would happen if the Zenthari succeeded in killing every human in the galaxy, and whether that victory would actually solve their original problem. She explained that the real threat posed by humanity was not their expansion or their aggression, but their example to other species throughout the galaxy. Humans had proven that intelligent beings could refuse to submit to stronger enemies and could thrive in conditions that seemed impossible. This knowledge could not be destroyed by killing humans because it was already spreading to other species. The Coalition had created exactly the situation they had tried to prevent by demonstrating that humans could fight back against overwhelming odds and survive. Every species in the galaxy was now watching to see whether a technologically inferior enemy could successfully resist the most powerful military force in known space. If humans succeeded, other species might decide to try the same approach. Admiral Kethvar realized that Dr. Foster was right about the strategic implications of this conflict, but he was trapped by political necessities that made retreat impossible. The Coalition had committed too many resources and lost too many troops. To simply abandon the conquest without achieving some kind of victory that would justify the costs. He asked Dr. Foster what it would take to make humanity surrender, and her answer revealed the fundamental problem that the Coalition faced. She told him that humans could not surrender because their psychology did not include the concept of acceptable defeat. They could be killed, but they could not be made to stop fighting voluntarily. The conversation ended when urgent reports arrived from across the war zone describing a new phase of human resistance that was even more disturbing than the guerrilla warfare of the previous months. Human prisoners of war had begun organizing mass escape attempts that turned Coalition detention facilities into battlegrounds. Even captured humans continued fighting and trying to return to the conflict. But the most alarming development was happening on Coalition worlds far from the front lines where human refugees and prisoners were spreading stories about the war and its real meaning. Other species were beginning to ask questions about why the mighty Coalition needed 6 months and hundreds of thousands of troops to defeat 50,000 farmers on a single human world. Admiral Kethvar dismissed Dr. Foster and returned to his tactical displays, knowing that he was facing a problem that could not be solved through military force alone. The humans had managed to turn their own conquest into a demonstration of Coalition weakness that was undermining the political stability of the entire galactic order. He began composing a report to the Coalition High Command that would be the most difficult message of his career. Admiral Kethvar had to find a way to explain that the Zenthari Empire's most experienced military leader was being defeated by an enemy that refused to acknowledge that they were losing. The Coalition High Command made their decision in desperation after receiving Admiral Kethvar's report that conventional military operations had failed to break human resistance after 8 months of continuous warfare. Ambassador Zethkri announced that the Coalition would begin using weapons of mass destruction to glass human worlds from orbit and eliminate the threat permanently through complete genocide. The first target was New California, a heavily populated human world with over 3 million residents that served as a major manufacturing center for the outer colonies. The planet's cities were destroyed in a single day as Coalition battleships reduced the surface to molten rock from orbit. The attack was broadcast throughout the galaxy as a warning to any species that might consider following the human example of resistance. The Coalition expected the massive loss of life to finally break human morale and force the remaining colonies to surrender unconditionally. Instead, The genocide attempt triggered something that military historians would later call the Awakening, as every human settlement began implementing emergency protocols that had been planned for exactly this scenario. Colonel Grace Thompson commanded the evacuation of New California and managed to save nearly 200,000 civilians by leading them to hidden underground shelters that had been secretly constructed over many years. When the orbital bombardment ended, she emerged from the ruins with a force of survivors that included everyone from engineers to school teachers to retired farmers. Instead of fleeing to safety, Colonel Thompson led her ragtag army directly to the nearest coalition supply depot, where they captured enough weapons and equipment to arm every human in the star system. The attack succeeded because the coalition garrison never expected desperate refugees to assault a heavily defended military installation with nothing but mining tools and pure determination. The news of New California's destruction spread through human space faster than official communications and triggered responses that the coalition had not anticipated. On every human world, peaceful farmers became saboteurs overnight as they began destroying anything that might be useful to occupying forces. Scientists abandoned their research to design improvised weapons and explosive devices. Even human children became part of the resistance effort by serving as scouts and messengers who could move through areas too dangerous for adults. The coalition discovered that they were not fighting human armies, but entire human populations that had transformed themselves into military forces without any formal training or central coordination. Captain Alex Carter was Jake Morrison's younger brother, and he commanded a salvage ship that had been studying coalition technology from the wreckage of space battles. His analysis of captured alien equipment revealed something that changed everything humans understood about their enemies and gave them their first real advantage in the war. Alex discovered that every alien species in the coalition possessed what human scientists called a surrender reflex that was built into their genetic code. When faced with overwhelming force or hopeless odds, these species would automatically submit to preserve their lives and the possibility of future survival. This biological programming made them effective at avoiding extinction, but terrible at fighting determined enemies. Humans were apparently the only known intelligent species that completely lacked this survival mechanism and instead became more dangerous when cornered rather than more desperate. This revelation explained why the coalition was so frightened of human expansion and why they had chosen genocide over negotiation as their preferred solution. The discovery reached President Elena Rodriguez just as Earth's orbital defense systems detected the approach of the coalition's planet-killer fleet led by a massive dreadnought called Galactic Justice. The enemy force was large enough to destroy Earth completely and seemed designed to end the human threat once and for all. But President Rodriguez now understood that the coalition's real weakness was not their technology or their numbers, but their psychology. They could not comprehend an enemy that treated certain defeat as merely another tactical problem to be solved through creativity and determination. This knowledge gap could be exploited if humans were willing to pay the necessary price. She convened an emergency meeting with the few remaining human military leaders and proposed a strategy that would have been considered insane by any other species in the galaxy. Instead of trying to defend Earth through conventional means, they would turn the planet itself into a weapon that would demonstrate human nature so clearly that no alien species could ignore its implications. General Marcus Webb objected that the plan would result in massive human casualties and the probable destruction of Earth's surface, but President Rodriguez reminded him that the alternative was complete extinction, with no chance of survival for anyone. At least her strategy offered the possibility that some humans would survive to continue the species even if their homeworld was lost. The preparation for Earth's final battle began immediately as every human on the planet received instructions for their role in what would become the greatest demonstration of human stubbornness in history. Civilian ships were converted into guided missiles, and orbital installations were rigged with explosive charges that would turn them into weapons when enemy forces tried to capture them. But the most important part of the plan involved broadcasting. Everything that happened to every species in the galaxy so that aliens throughout known space could witness exactly what made humans different from every other intelligent life form. The Coalition had wanted to eliminate humanity to prevent their example from spreading, but instead, they were about to provide the most dramatic demonstration possible of what humans represented. Dr. Kevin Ross was a linguistics professor who had become a refugee coordinator after his university was destroyed in the early fighting. He had spent months learning alien languages and studying Coalition communication protocols, and he would be responsible for broadcasting humanity's final message to the galaxy. His transmission would be sent on all frequencies in perfect galactic standard so that every species could understand exactly what they were witnessing. Dr. Ross would tell the galaxy that humans were about to prove something that the Coalition desperately wanted to keep secret. Some intelligent species simply could not be broken, no matter how hopeless their situation became. President Rodriguez looked at the tactical displays showing the approaching Coalition fleet and felt something that surprised her given the circumstances. She was not afraid of dying or even of seeing Earth destroyed because she knew that humanity had already accomplished something more important than survival. They had shown the galaxy that alternatives to submission existed, and that knowledge could never be destroyed. The Coalition planet killer fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system with enough firepower to destroy 100 worlds and finally end the human problem that had cost them so many ships and soldiers. Admiral Kethvar commanded the massive dreadnought Galactic Justice and carried orders to leave no trace of human civilization anywhere in the Sol system. The final ultimatum was broadcast on all frequencies as the Coalition fleet moved toward Earth with weapons, charging for the killing blow. Ambassador Zethkri's message was simple and absolute. Humanity had 30 minutes to surrender unconditionally or watch their homeworld burn until nothing remained but cooling rock floating in empty space. Earth's response came not from President Elena Rodriguez or any military commander, but from Dr. Kevin Ross, speaking in perfect galactic standard from a transmission station hidden somewhere on the planet's surface. His words were heard by every species in the galaxy as communication relays carried the message to the furthest reaches of known space. Dr. Ross told the aliens that they had come to Earth to destroy humanity because they feared what humans represented, to the carefully controlled order they had built across the galaxy. They were afraid of a species that could not be broken and could not be made to surrender, no matter how hopeless their situation became. Today, humanity would prove that their fears were completely justified. What followed was not a space battle, in any conventional sense, but a demonstration of everything that made humanity impossible to defeat through force alone. As Coalition ships moved to destroy Earth, they found themselves facing not just the human fleet, but every piece of space debris, asteroid, and derelict ship that humans had weaponized during months of desperate preparation. Commander Rachel Stone led the first wave of converted civilian ships directly into the Coalition formation with a transmission that became legendary throughout the galaxy. She told the aliens that they had never understood the fundamental difference between humans and every other species they had conquered. Humans did not fight to win battles, but fought because they refused to lose wars. Her ships were destroyed within minutes, but they accomplished their real purpose, which was to show the Coalition that humans would turn anything into a weapon rather than accept defeat. Passenger liners became guided missiles, and cargo haulers transformed into suicide bombers as human crews rammed their vessels into enemy warships with no regard for their own survival. The Coalition fleet found itself surrounded by enemies that continued fighting even when their ships were destroyed and their weapons were gone. Human crews used escape pods as improvised torpedoes and turned emergency beacons into homing devices for explosive charges. Even when Coalition forces tried to rescue human survivors, they discovered that the survivors were still trying to fight. Admiral Kethvar watched his tactical displays with growing horror as he realized that the humans had turned their own solar system into a massive trap designed to demonstrate their nature rather than achieve military victory. Every asteroid belt contained hidden bases, and every moon had been converted into a weapons platform that would continue operating even if Earth itself was destroyed. But the real turning point came when President Elena Rodriguez made a broadcast that reached every intelligent species in the galaxy and changed the political situation forever. She spoke directly to the billions of aliens who were watching humanity face extinction and offered them something that no government had ever proposed before. President Rodriguez explained that humanity was not asking for victory or even survival, but was simply proving that some species could choose to fight rather than submit when faced with overwhelming force. She told the galaxy that humans were about to die, but that their example would live forever as proof that alternatives to coalition rule existed. Her final message was directed not at the coalition, but at every species that had surrendered to them over the centuries of galactic expansion. She reminded them that they had once been free and independent, and asked them to remember what they had given up in exchange for safety and survival under coalition protection. The broadcast created immediate political problems for coalition members. Governments, as their own populations, began asking uncomfortable questions about the war and its real purpose. If humans could resist the coalition successfully for over a year using primitive technology, then perhaps other species could do the same with better preparation and coordination. Admiral Kethvar received urgent communications from Coalition High Command ordering him to complete the destruction of Earth immediately before the human example could inspire more rebellions. But he also received private messages from his own government expressing concern about the political costs of continuing a war that was becoming increasingly unpopular. The final phase of the battle began when human defense platforms throughout the solar system activated simultaneously and began broadcasting a message that Admiral Kethvar knew would haunt him for the rest of his career. The humans thanked the coalition for providing the galaxy with such a clear demonstration of the choice between freedom and security. They explained that every species watching would now understand that the coalition's peace was built on the threat of total destruction for anyone who refused to submit. But they would also understand that some species would choose to fight that threat rather than accept it no matter how certain their defeat might be. Admiral Kethvar made the decision that ended the war when he ordered his fleet to withdraw from Earth's solar system without completing their mission. He later wrote in his official report that the coalition had achieved a military victory but had suffered a strategic defeat that made their political situation impossible to maintain. The war ended not because humanity had won any battles, but because they had proven something that changed the galaxy forever. Ambassador Zethkri met with President Elena Rodriguez 5 years later at the first Galactic Human Peace Summit and admitted that the coalition had surrendered because they realized they were fighting an unwinnable conflict. When asked why the mighty coalition had been unable to defeat a primitive species with inferior technology, his answer became part of galactic history. He explained that you cannot defeat an enemy that treats defeat as merely another beginning, and that humanity had taught the galaxy that some species simply cannot be stopped. The peace treaty that followed established humanity as an independent power with the right to expand and colonize freely throughout the galaxy. More importantly, it included provisions that allowed other species to withdraw from the coalition if they chose to accept the risks that came with freedom rather than the safety that came with submission.